When you think of Sparta, what first leaps to mind?
For most people, I imagine it's the warriors, right? That image of Thermopylae.
Yeah, exactly. The stoic, unyielding fighters standing firm,
Yeah.
or maybe just that relentless military discipline, the whole Spartan spirit thing.
Mm-hmm. Hardship training.
Right. But what if I told you that this ancient city-state, often, sort of reduced to just tales of battle and brute force, actually cast a shadow far wider and more complex than just its battlefield exploits?
Okay.
What if its ideals, and maybe even more powerfully its myths, echoed through Western thought for centuries, really profoundly shaping the ideas of thinkers like Plato, Rousseau, and even feeding into the ideologies behind National Socialism?
Wow, that's quite a range. From Plato to, well, that's a huge leap.
It is. Okay, so let's unpack this. Today we're taking a deep dive into the lasting legacy of Sparta. We're going far beyond the battlefield.
Sounds fascinating.
We'll explore its intricate and, let's be honest, often pretty brutal society and uncover the surprising ways its ideals and sometimes, distorted versions of them resonated and evolved through Western philosophy, art, and politics.
And our material today, it draws heavily from excerpts of the history of Western philosophy, the influence of Sparta, which really gives us a fascinating lens for this.
Right.
What's particularly insightful, I think, about this source is how it immediately makes this critical distinction. Sparta's impact wasn't just about its historical reality. It was equally, maybe even more, about the powerful myth it generated, a myth that shaped thinkers and movements across millennia, many of whom, never even set foot in ancient Laconia.
Exactly. So our mission for this deep dive is kind of threefold. First, to distill the harsh realities that forged Sparta's triumphs, the stuff that enabled it to defeat even mighty Athens in war.
The practical side.
Right. Second, we'll examine the profound political theory it influenced, see its fingerprints on, well, utopian ideals sometimes. And finally, we'll try and understand why, and maybe how, its myth developed in such a way that it could be selectively embraced by doctrines as, well, different as Jean-Jacques Rousseau's vision of a natural society and the truly terrifying tenets of National Socialism.
That's the really challenging part, understanding that appropriation.
It is. So you'll leave this deep dive, hopefully, with a completely new understanding of why Sparta matters, not just as some historical footnote, but as an enduring, really potent idea, even today.
A living legacy, in a way.
Definitely. So here's where it gets really interesting. The source immediately brings us face to face with this core paradox.
Okay.
To genuinely understand philosophers like Plato, and actually many Western thinkers who came after him, we absolutely need to grasp something fundamental about Sparta. It had this double effect on Greek thought,
A double effect. How so?
through both its undeniable historical reality and the evolving power of its myth. So what does this distinction truly mean? How could one ancient city-state wield such a dual, powerful, and sometimes, contradictory influence?
It's a really profound puzzle, isn't it? And the source lays this out with remarkable clarity. The reality of Sparta. Well, that was its unparalleled military prowess, right? Its stoic discipline, its remarkably stable, though incredibly rigid, social structure.
This stuff we can historically verify.
Exactly. This wasn't just abstract philosophy. This was tangible power. The power that allowed Sparta to achieve concrete historical victories, most famously defeating its great rival, Athens, in the Peloponnesian War.
A huge turning point.
Absolutely. This historical fact, this undeniable effectiveness, it really solidified Sparta's place as this formidable force, a kind of blueprint for a state capable of extraordinary collective action. It showed everyone, basically, a working model of a society utterly dedicated to the state and military excellence.
Okay, so that's the reality, the tangible power, the victory over Athens.
Yeah.
But then there's the myth. How does that differ?
Ugh, the myth. This is where the story gets much more complex and, frankly, more influential over the long term. The source really emphasizes that Sparta itself wasn't just the subject of a myth. It was the source of this powerful, evolving narrative about an ideal society.
So it generated the myth itself.
In a way, yes. Over centuries, this myth wasn't just passively recounted, it was actively shaped, reinterpreted by successive generations of thinkers to favor their specific doctrines. We're talking about an astonishing breadth of influence here.
Like you mentioned before, Rousseau.
Exactly. From Enlightenment philosophers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who saw Sparta as a model for civic virtue, a return to natural simplicity, to someone like the radical individualist Friedrich Nietzsche, who admired its emphasis on strength and aristocratic order.
Polar opposites, almost.
Right. And then all the way to the chilling authoritarian ideologies of National Socialism. They found a kind of perverse inspiration in its state control and martial discipline.
It's hard to fathom that same source inspiring such different outcomes.
It is, and that's the power of the myth. This isn't just about historical facts or military campaigns anymore. It's about the extraordinary, enduring power of an idea, an idealized vision of Sparta that, as the centuries rolled on, sometimes bore very little resemblance to the complex, often quite brutal day-to-day realities lived within its borders.
So this dual legacy,
Yeah.
the reality and the myth,
Yeah.
it raises a really fundamental question, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. What was that reality like? This Spartan way of life that allowed it to become such a potent, adaptable myth, capable of inspiring such, disparate and often contradictory philosophies across millennia. Where do we even start?
Well, to truly begin to understand Sparta, I think we have to start literally with the ground it stood on, its
Good
foundation.
geography and history.
Exactly. The source meticulously details how Sparta, also known as Lacedaemon, was the capital of this strategically important region called Laconia and later Messenia, sort of nestled in the southeast of the Peloponnesus.
Right, that southern peninsula of Greece.
And this geographical context, the history of its inhabitants, it isn't just background noise. It's absolutely crucial because it dictates nearly everything that followed. For the Spartans, their unique social structure, their intense military focus, even their pervasive sense of fear.
Fear. That's interesting. How so?
Well, it connects directly to the bedrock of their society.
Ah, you mean the Helots.
Precisely. The very bedrock of Spartan society, its entire economic and social foundation, was built upon a conquered, subjugated people. The Helots.
And these weren't slaves in the way we might think of them, like chattel slaves.
No, not exactly. They weren't bought and sold as property like goods on a market. Instead, the Helots were fellow Greeks, the original inhabitants of Laconia and later Messenia. After the Dorian invasion, they were reduced to this unique form of serfdom, tied inextricably to the land.
So bound to the soil.
Right. Their condition was both precarious and absolutely vital economically. They couldn't be bought or sold separately from the land they worked, and their primary duty was cultivating the land lots assigned to Spartan citizens.
And they paid a heavy price for that.
Oh, definitely. In return for their labor, they owed their masters this fixed, substantial annual tribute. A really formidable 70 bushels of grain, 12 bushels of wine, and an unspecified quantity of fruit.
That's a huge amount. That basically supported the Spartan citizen entirely, didn't it?
It did. But what makes their situation even more complex, perhaps, is that despite this servile status, they did retain certain rights. They were allowed to own and cultivate their own plots of land beyond this tribute.
Oh, really? I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and they could even preserve their own customs and religious practices. And in times of dire need, some Helots were even pressed into military service.
Which must have been terrifying for the Spartans, arming the people they oppressed.
Absolutely. It shows their sheer numbers and the constant underlying threat they posed. Their collective labor wasn't just supporting the Spartans, it was the entire engine of the Spartan economy. It produced the vast majority of the wealth that allowed Spartan citizens the leisure to dedicate their lives entirely to military training and state service.
And the land itself remained Spartan property.
Yes, the land they worked was legally the property of the Helot owner, reinforcing this deeply unequal power dynamic.
So this vital economic engine, it must have come with a huge hidden cost, a constant tension.
An enormous cost, an ever-present undercurrent of dread.
Because the Helots were Greeks themselves, they knew they were subjugated.
Exactly. They harbored this bitter, simmering resentment toward their servile condition. Rebellions weren't just a possibility. They were a constant looming threat, like a sword of Damocles hanging over the Spartan state.
So how did the Spartans manage that, with the Helots vastly outnumbering them?
Well, they developed a chilling and highly effective response. A kind of secret police known as the Cryptia.
The Cryptia, I've heard of that. It sounds sinister.
It was. This wasn't a formal uniformed police force like we'd imagine. It was a covert system designed to instill terror and preempt rebellion. It involved Spartan youths, often as part of their agos training.
Their military school.
Right. Engaging in periodic, state-sanctioned acts of terror. This included the outright murder of Helots, who seemed insubordinate or influential, or maybe just too physically strong or capable.
Just killing them preemptively.
Yes. The source even highlights this particularly dark practice. The Spartans would sometimes formally declare war on the Helots.
Declare war on their own serfs.
Yeah, it wasn't a conventional war against an external enemy. It was a chilling legal maneuver. It allowed young Spartan men to kill any helots who seemed threatening without incurring guilt in the eyes of the gods or their own society.
That's horrifying. A license to kill, essentially.
Pretty much. This system, sometimes ominously called the Great Year of the Helots in certain historical contexts, it just underscores the deep-seated fear that permeated Spartan society. It wasn't random violence. It was the deliberate, institutionalized policy of terror.
And you mentioned they couldn't be freed easily either.
Right. Unlike many other types of slaves in the ancient world, helots could not be emancipated by the state itself. Only their individual masters had the unique power to grant them freedom, which again reinforces the personal yet state-controlled nature of their oppression.
Wow. That paints a really stark, terrifying picture of the tension just beneath the surface of Spartan life.
Absolutely. And this constant threat, this reliance on the helots, it profoundly shaped the Spartan citizens' own lives too, didn't it? Particularly around land and wealth.
How so?
Well, the source points out that land was meticulously divided into lots, these kleroi. One or more was assigned to each adult male Spartan citizen.
Right, the basis of their citizenship.
And this wasn't just about farming or providing food, it was about shaping their entire economic philosophy, their whole way of life.
Ah, the famous Spartan equality, or attempt at it.
Exactly. This meticulous land division was absolutely fundamental to maintaining a very specific kind of economic equality among Spartan citizens. The goal, really radical for its time, was nothing less than to banish the corrosive influences of greed, injustice, envy, covetousness, all that stuff.
Trying to engineer morality through economics.
Pretty much. Ultimately, this was intended to improve public morals by severely limiting the accumulation of private wealth. And this was achieved through a truly unique economic constraint. Spartan citizens were strictly forbidden from engaging in commerce or trade.
They famously hated money, didn't they?
They scorned it. They famously scorned large sums of money, believing it was inherently corrupting and unprofitable. Instead of gold or silver, they used that cumbersome iron coinage.
Which made hoarding wealth almost physically impossible.
Exactly. It deliberately made large transactions impractical and unattractive. This wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a cornerstone of their social engineering. It ensured that all Spartan men, because of their land lots and the helot labor, were economically capable of contributing to the common messes.
The syssitia.
Right, the syssitia. And it ensured they had the necessary leisure time to dedicate themselves fully to the state and military training, rather than being distracted by trying to get rich individually.
So stripping away the motivation for personal gain, redirecting everything towards the collective.
That was the idea. So it becomes abundantly clear that the helot system and this unique, almost ideological land distribution weren't just economic pillars for Sparta.
No, they dictated everything.
They were the absolute dictators of Sparta's entire social and political structure, fundamentally shaping the daily realities of its citizens from birth to death.
Which raises that important question. How did this unique system, born out of conquest, sustained by fear, really shape the daily lives of individual Spartans right from the moment they entered the world?
Yeah, if we connect this to the bigger picture, this unique economic and social setup, it just profoundly impacted individual Spartan lives, birth to death. The source paints this incredibly vivid picture of a society completely dedicated to the state and military prowess.
Almost from conception, it seems.
Almost. It wasn't just a suggestion or a preference. It was this all-encompassing, rigorously enforced way of life that dictated nearly every choice and experience.
And it started brutally early, didn't it, with the infants?
Yeah, it did. The Spartan experiment in social engineering began almost immediately. It started with that infamous law, maybe one of the most brutal expressions of their, well, eugenic philosophy. Newborn children were subjected to this rigorous inspection by the elders or the heads of the tribe.
Checking for imperfections.
Right. Any child deemed sickly, weak, or physically imperfect was condemned to death, just heartlessly thrown into a deep pit, the apothete, at the foot of Mount Taygetus.
It's chilling, purely pragmatic from their point of view.
Completely. This selection process wasn't arbitrary. It ensured only the physically robust, the ones deemed fit for military life and future childbearing, were allowed to live. It aligned perfectly with their goal of cultivating an invincible military.
And if they survived that first hurdle?
If they passed that initial brutal inspection, boys were then taken from their families at the tender age of 7.
7 years old. Wow.
Yeah. From that moment on, they lived communally in large dormitories, organized into companies, agili, under the supervision of older, more experienced boys. This marked a profound shift. The state, not the family, became the primary educator, caregiver, shaper of their identities.
The Agoj.
The agoj, their formal education. It was rigorously designed to make them hardy, indifferent to pain, utterly submissive to discipline. The curriculum was overwhelmingly physical training, martial drills, basic literacy.
But not much else. No arts, no science.
Virtually none. No emphasis on cultural, artistic, or scientific education. The singular aim was to produce perfect soldiers, almost unthinking instruments of the state's will.
And this communal life just continued.
It continued right into adulthood. At age 20, these young men officially entered full military service. Crucially, their communal living didn't stop. They continued to live and eat in a common mess.
Even after marriage.
Yeah, marriage was permitted at 20, but it was often a kind of clandestine affair. They still resided in the men's house until age 30. So even as husbands, they'd often have to go out at night to visit their wives.
Incredible. Almost like a secret life.
Right. Only after 30 could they finally live with their wives in their own homes. But even then, the requirement to eat daily in the common mess remained, constantly reinforcing that collective identity and loyalty to the state above family.
So their entire adult male life was just structured around communal living, military dedication, suppression of individual desires.
Pretty much. And this common mess, this syzygia, it was clearly more than just a place to eat, wasn't it? It was core to their social, economic, even moral system, a literal embodiment of their collective ethos.
Absolutely central. The beating heart of Spartan daily life for men. Every citizen was required to belong to a mess, dining together daily with the same group.
And they had to contribute.
Yes, each member had to contribute a precise portion of his land lot. Lots produce, grain, wine, fruit, ensuring everyone literally chipped into the common pot. This wasn't just about food, it reinforced that core principle. No citizen should be destitute, but crucially, no citizen should be excessively rich either.
Back to that rejection of wealth.
Exactly. Wealth, gold, silver money, it was actively scorned, forbidden. The source highlights that Spartan simplicity became proverbial. Everything from their iron coinage to their homes and clothing reflected this deliberate rejection of luxury and individual adornment.
Simple clothes, simple houses.
Yeah, their values and appearance reflected this extreme dedication. They famously wore no coats, their clothing described by some outsiders as nasty and sluttish. They're said to have bathed only on certain days of the year, emphasizing ruggedness over comfort or hygiene.
Even their beds were rough.
Slept on beds of straw mixed with thistles, apparently. Just cultivating indifference to discomfort, constant readiness for hardship. Even their behavior was strictly controlled and paradoxically trained.
The stealing thing.
Right. They were notoriously taught to steal, not for personal gain, but as a test of cunning and self-reliance. Punishment came not for stealing itself, but for the clumsiness of getting caught. It cultivated this ruthless practicality.
Wow. And what about personal relationships? The source mentions homosexuality.
Yes, the source mentions that homosexuality was not forbidden. In fact, it seems to have been recognized as a custom within the Agoj. The idea was perhaps to make boys more loyal and devoted to older mentors or lovers, fostering these unbreakable bonds within military units.
And Plutarch tells a story about that.
He does. Plutarch recounts this vivid, almost shocking story where a young boy cried out in pain during a training fight. His older male lover was then fined not for the boy being hurt, but for the boy's implied cowardice and showing weakness. So the lover failed to adequately instill fortitude.
That's intense. It really shows the values at play.
It does. The sheer level of control over individual lives in Sparta, right down to the most intimate physical and emotional details. It's truly striking, almost unimaginable to us today.
But this comprehensive societal engineering, it seems focused primarily on the male citizens, the warriors.
Mostly, yes.
So that begs the crucial question. What about the other half of the population? How did Spartan women fit into this highly structured martial society? Because their role was surprisingly different, wasn't it?
Dramatically different from women in other Greek cities, yes. It offers a really unique counterpoint to that rigid male world.
You might instinctively expect women in such a rigid, military-focused society to be entirely marginalized, maybe hidden away like Athenian women often were.
That would be the logical assumption based on other Greek examples.
But what's fascinating here, and it really challenges common perceptions of ancient Greek societies, is that the source explicitly states Spartan women occupied this uniquely prominent and respected position. Strikingly different, they were far less secluded, held a greater degree of social and even economic influence.
It's a significant, almost revolutionary departure from the norms of the ancient Greek world. Spartan women, unlike their counterparts elsewhere, underwent the same rigorous physical training as the men. Really? Wrestling, javelin.
Yes, wrestling, javelin throwing, discus throwing, they participated publicly. The purpose, according to the Spartan ideology, was pragmatic and completely state-centric. Ensure they developed strong, healthy bodies capable of bearing lusty, robust offspring, ideal future citizens and warriors.
So, breeding stock, essentially, but highly valued breeding stock.
In a way, yes. And what's even more striking, and would have been utterly scandalous elsewhere in Greece, is that they reportedly exercised naked alongside the men.
Naked.
Yes, and performed in public dances and festivals. This public presence, this physical display, was highly unusual for Greek women whose lives were typically confined to the domestic sphere. The source even notes girls were often given more remarkable or distinctive names than elsewhere, suggesting maybe a greater public recognition or value.
Okay, so physically active, publicly visible. What about marriage and family? Still controlled by the state? Absolutely. The state's influence remained paramount, overriding romance or individual preferences. Marriage was often that clandestine affair we mentioned, designed not for personal pleasure, but for the express purpose of producing robust children for the state.
And the source mentioned something about multiple partners.
It hints at it, yes, that children could sometimes be born from multiple partners, an arrangement possibly tolerated, maybe even encouraged if it led to more or stronger offspring. Again, state utility above all. Divorce was readily allowed, especially for childless marriages, emphasizing the purpose of marriage for the state, not personal fulfillment.
So, trained for the state, married for the state, but beyond that, they had real power. Economic power.
They did, and this is where their unconventional power truly shines and really challenges our assumptions. The legendary Lycurgus' constitution, that foundational legal framework, assigned Spartan women a substantial 2/5 share of all the land.
2/5? That's huge.
It's massive. It meant they held considerable property and wealth, a level of economic autonomy pretty much unprecedented in most other Greek societies. Beyond land ownership, they also held significant dominion over their households, were largely independent in domestic affairs, wielding considerable influence within the home, a domain often seen as exclusively male elsewhere. Did this have any downsides from the Spartan perspective?
Well, the source suggests, perhaps speculatively, that this increasing wealth and influence of women might have inadvertently contributed to a decline in the male citizen population over time. As women gained autonomy, maybe they chose fewer children or exerted more control over family decisions.
And Aristotle noticed this, didn't he? He had critiques.
He did. Aristotle, that astute observer, offers this crucial external critique in his Politics. He specifically noted Spartan women held considerable property and were, in his view, perhaps a bit biased, loose.
Loose, meaning undisciplined.
Yeah, meaning not held to the same strict standards of discipline and austerity as the men. He explicitly saw their wealth and influence and the resulting perceived lack of discipline among them as a significant weakness in the Spartan constitution.
Why a weakness?
He thought it contributed to a certain narrowness of view among the men, maybe linked to their lack of broad education. He suggested a society couldn't be truly balanced if half its population operated by different rules or had perhaps too much destabilizing influence.
Interesting critique. So Spartan women had this unheard of freedom and influence, especially economically.
Right, yet even this was ultimately framed within the larger purpose of the state, although maybe imperfectly managed, as Aristotle suggested.
Okay, so this unique social contract fear, discipline, this peculiar quality, the unique role of women, it all had to operate within a political system, right?
Exactly, which leads us to consider the overarching machinery of the state, the Spartan government that allowed such a unique society to function, or maybe constrained it. What did this complex political structure actually look like?
Because the source says it was complicated, not simple at all.
Right. Not a simple monarchy, not a pure democracy. It sounds like a sophisticated political experiment, designed maybe to prevent any single power from becoming too dominant, while still preserving that unique Spartan identity.
Okay, so break it down for us. What were the key components?
Well, at the top, Sparta famously had that unique dual kingship.
2 kings, always.
Always 2 kings, from 2 distinct hereditary families. Their main, most significant role was as supreme army commanders in wartime, leading the forces into battle.
But less power in peacetime.
Exactly. Their power in peacetime was remarkably limited. It prevented any single monarch from getting too powerful, becoming a tyrant, They did preside over some trials, giving them a symbolic judicial role, but their overall civil authority was deliberately constrained, a key balancing act.
Okay, two kings with limited power. What else?
Below the kings, you had the Venerable Council of Elders, the Gerousia.
The old guys.
Basically, yeah, an aristocratic body, 30 members. The two kings, plus 28 other citizens, all had to be over 60, and they were chosen for life by acclamation.
Shouting!
Essentially, yeah, by the loudest shouts of approval from the assembly. The Gerousia had significant power. They tried all criminal cases, acting as Sparta's highest court, and crucially, they prepared all matters to be brought before the assembly.
So they controlled the agenda.
Precisely. Their power was in shaping the legislative agenda. They could initiate or reject laws, but they couldn't just vote yes or no on proposals from others.
Huh.
It emphasizes their role as this deliberative, controlling body, not just reactive.
Okay, kings, Gerousia, then the assembly. The appella. That sounds more democratic.
It sounds like it offered a more democratic element, but with very distinct, very precise limitations, almost like a controlled form of popular participation.
How is it limited?
Well, the assembly was composed of all adult male citizens, so every Spartan man had a voice, theoretically. However, their power was severely restricted. They could only vote yes or no on proposals put forward by the Gerousia.
No debating. No amendments.
Nope. No power to initiate new laws, couldn't amend existing ones. Decisions were made by that acclamation method, shouting, which, you can imagine, could be influenced by popular mood or powerful figures.
So, democratic on the surface, but heavily managed.
Exactly. The source even explicitly notes that despite these elements that seem democratic, it was fundamentally a system where a ruling class tyrannized over the vast majority of the helots and also held considerable power over the free non-citizens, the Periuishi, who lived nearby.
Okay, so kings, council, assembly. But wasn't there another group? The E4s. They sound important.
Immensely important. Perhaps the most intriguing and arguably the most powerful element were the E4s. There were 5 of them, elected annually by the entire body of citizens.
Elected annually. That's quite democratic.
It is a strong popular component in their selection. And these officials held supreme civil court jurisdiction. They oversaw virtually all aspects of civil life. Their power was immense.
Wow, immense.
They could check the king's behavior, even put the kings on trial. Incredibly, they had the authority to depose kings, a really rare power in the ancient world. They also controlled the king's military expeditions, effectively overseeing the state's supreme commanders.
Wow, so they could override the kings.
Effectively, yes. And it was the E4s who were primarily responsible for propagating and enforcing the laws of Lycurgus. They were the ultimate guardians of the Spartan way of life, ensuring everyone stuck to the strict rules.
And speaking of Lycurgus,
Yeah.
this almost mythical lawgiver, he's credited with this whole intricate system, right?
He is. The source makes it clear that for the Spartans themselves, he was more than just a historical figure. He was almost a divine foundational force.
Like Moses or Solon.
Sort of, but maybe even more mythical. Lycurgus was revered by the Spartans as this mythical personage, maybe even bordering on a god. He's attributed with creating the entire Spartan constitution, supposedly crystallized into its perfect form after a divine vision from Delphi.
Do historians think he actually existed?
It's debated. Modern historians question whether a single Lycurgus truly existed, or if he was maybe a composite figure representing a long period of legal and social evolution. But for the Spartans, his name was the ultimate authority.
And his name meant something.
Yeah, wolf repeller, apparently. Which itself is symbolic, reflecting Sparta's self-perceived mission to, civilize its neighbors, establish order, be this disciplined shepherd against chaos. His constitution for them was timeless, divinely inspired, a fixed point of reference. And for some later thinkers, that idea remained relevant, influential, even into the 20th century.
So this whole intricate system, the checks, the balances, the E4s, the myth of Lycurgus, it provided stability.
Remarkable stability for a very long time, especially when you compare it to the frequent political upheavals, the revolutions that plagued other Greek cities.
But how did this unique state, with its rigid internal structure, its distinct values, interact with the rest of the Greek world? And what was its ultimate fate?
Right, let's broaden the lens now. Let's consider Sparta in that wider context of the Greek world. How did this disciplined, military-focused society, with all its unique internal workings, compare to, say, Athens, that vibrant hub of culture, philosophy, nascent democracy?
They often feel like polar opposites, don't they? Yet existing side by side, shaping what it meant to be Greek.
They truly were a study in contrast, this fascinating dichotomy within the Greek world. Sparta stood out as remarkably unique. It was strikingly unpretentious, far less commercial than trading cities like Corinth or Athens.
And suspicious of new ideas.
Very much so. Largely undisturbed by the influx of new ideas or the intellectual ferment that characterized Athens. Its citizens place supreme value on virtue, especially military virtue, communal discipline, that rugged simplicity far above individual wealth or intellectual pursuits.
And other Greeks admired this stability.
Immensely. That very stability, that remarkable resistance to internal political chaos, was a primary reason for the admiration Sparta garnered. When compared to the constant revolutions and factional strife elsewhere, Sparta's steadfastness seemed almost miraculous, a model of order.
But they were quite isolationist too, weren't they?
Extremely. Their unique identity strongly shaped their interaction with outsiders. Spartans were generally forbidden from traveling abroad, and conversely, foreigners were rarely admitted into Sparta, except for very specific, limited purposes.
Why such isolation?
It was driven by this deep-seated, almost paranoid fear that exposure to foreign influences, new ideas, luxurious ways of life would corrupt their cherished Lacedaemonian virtue and simplicity. They believed their way of life was inherently fragile, a delicate balance needing strict isolation to preserve its integrity.
Which probably contributed to their later stagnation, culturally speaking.
Almost certainly. While ensuring internal cohesion, it also led to their eventual cultural stagnation relative to other Greek centers.
But this intensely disciplined, often isolationist approach, it definitely translated into undeniable military prowess, didn't it? They had that fearsome reputation.
Oh, absolutely. A mystique, almost. For a very long time, the Spartans proved themselves nearly invincible on land. Their reputation was well-earned, built on that rigorous training and almost fanatical dedication.
The Persian Wars are key here.
Absolutely pivotal role in defeating the massive Persian Empire, preventing the subjugation of Greece.
Yeah.
And Thermopylae, 480 BC, remains the most iconic testament to their valor.
300 Spartans.
Right, the 300 Spartans plus their Boeotian auxiliaries, famously holding that narrow pass, repeatedly repelling attacks from a vastly superior Persian army. Their ultimate defeat there wasn't a failure of valor, but a strategic sacrifice that bought time for the rest of Greece to mobilize, securing eventual victory.
And there's that story of the survivor, Aristodemus.
Yes, the poignant story of Aristodemus, the so-called coward, who survived Thermopylae because of illness, but later wiped out his disgrace by dying with extreme bravery in another battle. It just illustrates the intense honor code.
And the famous epitaph.
Stranger, tell the Lacedaemonians that we lie here in obedience to their orders. The absolute epitome of Spartan military tradition and self-sacrifice.
But this dominance didn't last forever.
No. Despite their long-standing dominance on land and their unyielding spirit, Spartan supremacy eventually ended after the Thebans' decisive victory at Leuctra in 371 BC.
A major turning point.
Huge. That battle marked a significant shift, irrevocably signaling the decline of Spartan hegemony, ushering in a new era of shifting power balances in Greece.
And in practice, how did their values play out beyond the battlefield?
Well, it translated into that profound love of a simple, unadorned life, a deep disdain for riches, material comforts, and notably, even a certain disdain for what they saw as frivolous intellectual pursuits.
Philosophers weren't welcome.
Plato and other philosophers, with their complex arguments and abstract ideas, were often seen as silly or impractical in Sparta. It reflects their anti-intellectual bent, their focus on practical, martial virtues. The source also mentions examples like Pausanias.
The traitor king.
Right, a Spartan king who tragically betrayed his state for personal gain, reinforcing Sparta's fierce policy against such individualistic actions. Ultimately, after their period of rule, Sparta's influence waned, and the broader Hellenic world, maybe tired of their rigid dominance, was said to have fallen into a period of indifference after their decline. A subtle critique, perhaps, of their inability to adapt or inspire culturally beyond their military model.
Okay, so that gives us a clear sense of Sparta's immediate impact, its identity, its rise and fall within its historical context.
Right. But perhaps the most profound and certainly the most enduring part of our deep dive comes now.
The philosophical echoes.
Exactly. How did this distinctive city-state, both in its stark reality and, crucially, its idealized myth, continue to shape Western philosophical thought for centuries, long after its military and political power faded?
It's truly remarkable how a city-state already in decline by the 4th century BCE could have such a potent, lasting influence on millennia of thought.
Okay, so let's talk about this incredible, almost phantom philosophical reach of Sparta. We've meticulously explored its unique society, its strict governance, but the source explicitly makes this powerful, surprising connection between Sparta and some of the biggest, most influential names in Western thought.
It really shows its enduring power, not just as history, but as an idea, a flexible blueprint.
So who's the key figure here? Where does this influence start?
Well, perhaps the most central and certainly the earliest figure in this profound legacy is Plato.
Plato.
Yeah.
Okay.
The source strongly emphasizes that Sparta deeply, almost indelibly, influenced Plato's political theory, particularly as he lays it out in his magnum opus, The Republic.
Right, his ideal state.
Exactly. And Plato, as you know, was this towering figure. His ideas profoundly shaped early Christianity, informed Aristotle's thought, laid much of the groundwork for the entire medieval church.
So his view of Sparta mattered hugely.
Immensely. His vision of an ideal state with its strict class divisions, the communal living among the guardians, the emphasis on collective virtue, extensive state control over education, even procreation, it drew heavily from an idealized Spartan model.
Idealized being the key word, not the messy reality.
Precisely. Much of this idealization seems to have stemmed not necessarily from direct experience with Sparta's complex reality, but from later philosophical accounts, particularly Plutarch's influential Life of Lycurgus's, which would significantly shape Plato's perception, and in turn, subsequent philosophers' understanding of Sparta.
So Plato saw Sparta's discipline as a path to a better society.
He saw in its discipline a path to a more just, more orderly society, free from what he saw as the chaos and self-interest of Athenian democracy.
Okay, so Plato idealizes it. But Aristotle, his brilliant student, he often offered a more grounded, empirical, sometimes critical view. What was his take?
You've hit on a crucial distinction. Aristotle provides this essential counterpoint to Plato's idealism. He offers a very different, more critical perspective, famously scrutinizing the Spartan constitution in his great work, Politics.
What were his main criticisms?
They were pointed and specific, showing real analytical distance, not just admiration. He highlighted the unequal distribution of property, arguing it actually led to a decline in the number of active citizens as wealth concentrated in fewer hands over time.
Interesting. What else?
He also critiqued the excessive power wielded by the ephors, suggesting it created an unstable, almost tyrannical element within the constitution. And furthermore, he pointed to the significant and, in his view, unchecked influence of women.
Right, the looseness he perceived.
Yes, which he saw as a lack of discipline that undermined the overall austerity of the Spartan system. And he noted the overall lack of general education among Spartan men, which he believed led to narrow views and inability to adapt to changing circumstances or govern effectively in peacetime.
So a much more practical, less romantic view.
Definitely. For Aristotle, knowledge was most valuable when understood critically and applied practically. A stark contrast to the Spartan emphasis on simplicity and physical prowess over intellectual development. He was concerned with functional efficacy, long-term sustainability, not just abstract ideals.
Okay, Plato idealizes, Aristotle critiques, but the myth lives on.
Profoundly. Beyond these foundational Greek thinkers, the myth of Sparta continued to resonate through centuries, and Plutarch's Life of Lycurgus, written much later during the Roman Empire, was absolutely critical in transmitting this idealized Spartan image.
Plutarch again. He seems key.
He's hugely important. This work became a key source, almost a canonical text for countless later thinkers, particularly influencing figures during the 18th century Enlightenment, like the transformative philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau.
Rousseau. The noble, savage corruption of civilization. How did Sparta fit into that?
Rousseau was deeply, almost reverently, influenced by Lycurgus and the Spartan ideal, as portrayed by Plutarch. He saw Sparta as the perfect antithesis to what he perceived as the superfluities and vanities, the artificiality and corruption of sophisticated urban commercial societies like the Ionian cities or even Paris in his own time.
So Sparta was more natural to him.
Exactly. He viewed Lycurgus not just as a historical figure, but as the supremely enlightened reformer, a philosophical legislator who created laws that genuinely helped humanity by stripping away the veneer of corruption, promoting a more primitive and natural state focused entirely on communal well-being, civic virtue, collective identity.
Free from individualism.
Free from the distractions of individual wealth, luxury, self-interest. For Rousseau, true freedom lay in collective submission to the general will of the community, a concept he saw beautifully embodied in the Spartan dedication to the state above all else. He admired their lack of private property, their communal living, seeing these as essential for fostering genuine equality and civic spirit.
Okay, so Rousseau sees a virtuous natural state. What about Nietzsche? He seems completely different.
Completely different angle, but also fascinated by Sparta. Jumping forward to the 19th century, we find Friedrich Nietzsche, another hugely influential, often controversial philosopher, looking to Sparta.
What did he see in them?
Nietzsche admired the Spartans immensely. He viewed them as an almost perfect example of strong, noble types, embodying a profound will to power and a disciplined self-overcoming. He saw them as this powerful contrast to what he perceived as the weakness, the decadence, the herd morality of Athenian democracy.
Which he despised.
Right. With its emphasis on intellectualism, pity, egalitarianism, things he saw as undermining human excellence. For Nietzsche, Sparta represented an aristocratic warrior ideal, a society that prioritized strength, discipline, the cultivation of superior individuals, even if it meant suppressing the weak. He found in their rigid system, their rejection of comfort, a powerful assertion of life-affirming values, opposing what he considered life-denying forces elsewhere.
It's fascinating and frankly quite chilling how these ancient ideals can be twisted, selectively interpreted, and repurposed by wildly different, even dangerous political ideologies.
It really is.
And the source explicitly mentions National Socialism, which is a very heavy, deeply uncomfortable connection. How specifically did the Spartan model appeal to such a dark and destructive ideology? What elements resonated?
This is perhaps the most uncomfortable, yet absolutely crucial, part of Sparta's enduring legacy. It highlights the dangerous malleability of historical narratives. The source explicitly states that the Spartan state appears as a model in miniature, a kind of ancient blueprint for the type of society the Nazi regime sought to establish if they were victorious.
What specific ideas?
Well, the core ideas of sacrificing individual liberty for the absolute, unquestioning authority of the state, extreme militarism, the glorification of war, rigorous physical selection processes like that inspection of newborns, and a chilling focus on what they perceived as racial purity and strength. All of this resonated profoundly and alarmingly with Nazi ideology.
So they saw the Lycurgan system as a precedent.
Exactly. The Spartan constitution, particularly the mythical Lycurgan system with its total state control over birth, education, daily life, the suppression of individual economic activity, it was viewed by Nazi ideologues as a historical precedent, an ancient justification for their own horrific authoritarian visions.
Even the eugenics.
They selectively interpreted Sparta's eugenic practices, like eliminating weak infants, as a historical validation for their own monstrous racial hygiene programs. The Agoges' brutal, dehumanizing training resonated with their desire to create an obedient fighting machine. The Spartan focus on a singular, unified state devoid of internal dissent or individual ambition mirrored their totalitarian aspirations.
And the source suggests this view persisted.
Yes, the source notes that Lycurgus' constitution was viewed, by some involved in these later movements, as having been so perfectly preserved in its ideal form that it continued to influence these horrific ideas even into the 20th century. It demonstrates how the myth of Sparta could be selectively interpreted, distorted, and wielded as this potent ideological tool for justifying authoritarian, militaristic, even genocidal regimes. It's a truly stark reminder of the power of selective history.
Across all these vastly different movements, then, Plato's utopia, National Socialism's dystopia, are there common threads they pulled from the Spartan ideal?
There are. Certain themes consistently emerge. There's the idea of a highly disciplined life, a complete absence of idleness and luxury, an overwhelming focus on the state and its collective good above any individual desires or aspirations, a resolute rejection of commerce and personal wealth, and that powerful concept of a commonwealth, where all citizens contributed to and ideally benefited from the communal effort.
And the myth was key.
The source really emphasizes that the myth of Sparta, sometimes completely divorced from its complex, often brutal historical reality, just continued to evolve, influencing art, political ideas, hopes, fears, long after its historical reality faded. What's truly fascinating here is how this enduring image of Sparta, sometimes pristine, sometimes distorted, served as this powerful ideological tool for vastly different philosophical and political movements across history, each selectively drawing whatever they needed from its enduring, powerful narrative.
So what does this all mean for us today? We've journeyed through Sparta's intricate society, its surprising governance, the unique roles of its women, and traced its profound, sometimes contradictory influence on Western thought.
It's been quite a journey.
We've truly seen that Sparta was far, far more than just a military machine. It was a societal experiment, a philosophical blueprint that, through its reality, and even more so its evolving myth, captured the imagination of philosophers and political thinkers for millennia, inspiring both utopian visions and chillingly terrifying realities.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Sparta truly embodies this idea that a historical entity, a civilization, can have a dual, incredibly powerful legacy. There's its factual, often harsh reality, which shaped its immediate history. And then there's the even more potent, adaptable, and sometimes dangerous myth it generates. A narrative that can take on a life of its own, evolving, being reinterpreted to suit the ideological needs of later eras.
And understanding that distinction is key.
Absolutely crucial. Understanding this fundamental distinction between the historical reality and the cultural myth is vital to grasping Sparta's continuing, often surprising, impact on philosophical and political ideas. From Plato's earliest blueprints to the darkest implications embraced by National Socialism, the enduring power of Sparta lies not just in what it was, but in the myriad and often contradictory ways it came to represent powerful ideas to different thinkers across history.
Wow. So this deep dive leaves us with an important question, doesn't it? So something for you, our listener, to mull over or explore on your own.
Okay.
In our modern world, where information is just abundant, but often filtered through so many different lenses, where narratives can be constructed and amplified with unprecedented speed, how do the myths we create or perpetuate about our past, whether about ancient civilizations, historical figures, or even our own nations, how do they continue to shape our present beliefs and perhaps even guide our future actions, even when those myths diverge dramatically from historical fact?
A really important question.
Yeah. The story of Sparta reminds us of the profound power of an idea and maybe the responsibility that comes with interpreting history.